All right. So we, as promised, are going to do a deep dive into Morgan Frost. And we thought who better to do that with than someone who's been covering him for a long time. We are so happy to welcome Brad Coccimiglio, who is a sports reporter who covers the Soo Greyhounds for Soo Today Sports. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. I was excited to be here and happy to chat about Morgan for sure. He was a great kid when he was here.
Absolutely. So, right after he was drafted, Morgan Frost took a huge leap forward where he went from 2016-17 with 62 points to 2017-18 with 112 points. What accounted for that huge step forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think his role took a step that year as well. I mean, that was a little bit. That team was getting a little older. He kind of came in. When he officially joined the team, he kind of came in at a point where they were kind of going into that first year of the 3-year rebuild in the OHL. So he had just joined the team after they had kind of stacked up to go on a run. So kind of that rookie year and then that second year, he was a kid that was getting a little more ice time, and then in after that, it was just a matter of he got the ice time, his confidence goes up. He's like a lot of kids at the OHL level where you see these kids come in and they're very raw, they're inexperienced, and it's like going from junior to the pros when you come from minor midget, or as they're calling it now in Canada, the U18 level and the U16 levels. To make that jump to the OHL is a big jump. So for him getting settled in, I think, kind of that second year, you started to see a lot of glimpses of how good he could be. And
Mhm.
then, that following year was when it really kind of all came together. And, he was fortunate that he came in with a good group. Tampa prospect Boris Kachuk was kind of part of that same development group with the Greyhounds at that time. And, Zach Sinishin was a part of that group as well, the Boston first rounder from a few years ago as well. So, yeah, I mean, it was a matter of his confidence level growing, and I think we saw big steps in his development over that stretch, and he would have set career highs in points and in his last year in junior as well, had it not been for him going to the World Juniors and missing. I think that year he ended up missing 11 or 12 games overall. But yeah, I mean, confidence level and just that development of getting settled into the league really kind of helped him in terms of making that jump offensively that year.
Yeah, Brad, I got clued into Morgan early on from a friend who knows his dad, and now I know his dad, and but at that time I was told, "Hey, watch him." And this was the year that you talked about before he really had the development. So I had a chance to see a good part of that early development cycle. So the first question I want to ask is, what was his decision making like back then? Obviously, he gained confidence, but sort of like just with the puck, what was his decision making like?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was a kid that, the game, like I said earlier, the OHL game moves a lot quicker than it does, at the lower levels at the U18 and U16 levels. So, I think it was, when I talk about the adjustment, I think that's all part and parcel to it, right? Is, the idea that you have to make that adjustment to the fact that you're not getting that extra time that you would, especially like when he was playing in midget and Barry, prior to joining the Greyhounds, where, let's face it, if you're a high end player at that level, you're going to have more time to make that decision. So you've got a little more time to think.
Mhm.
And I think that's an adjustment that a lot of kids have to make coming into major junior. I think for him, he was, I believe, a fourth or fifth round pick by the Greyhounds prior to actually joining the team. And, he was a kid that I think a lot of people, in the Greyhound organization were high on him. But, that decision making, I think, it was based on the fact that he was getting adjusted to the speed. He was getting adjusted to the fact that the decision making ability was there. It was just a matter of adjusting it to the fact that he didn't have quite as much time to make a decision. And I think in some cases for forwards, I think it might almost be, a little easier in a sense as opposed to a defenseman where it's, as a defenseman, you've got a lot more on your mind. Especially in the defensive zone, if a forward's coming in on you when you're in terms of making a breakout, where forward, it's you're coming back at your spots, but
Hmm.
on the offensive side of it, I think that was the biggest thing is just the fact that the decision making ability was there. It was just a matter of getting adjusted to the fact that he didn't quite have that extra second or two to make that decision. And once that started to really hit, that's where his offensive game really started to take off.
So part of that offensive game, I think, was his two-step quickness. Like, how would you say it was then, and do you have any insight into how it is now in comparison?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that, you could see it, at the junior level. I mean, especially those last 2 years here in the Sioux, I think, he was always a kid that was, able to kind of get that jump and be in that position. And, I think now it's, I think we're starting to see that, maybe come into play a little bit now at the next level. When he was with the Greyhounds, especially those last 2 years, he was always, his quickness and his speed. It was always there, and especially on display those last couple of years. And I think now we're starting to see that a little more in his game. And again, it's we talked about the adjustment. It's a big adjustment. Making the jump even to the American League, and this year we're starting to see a little bit of that offensive ability coming into play for him. With Lehigh Valley, so he's a kid that I think as he gets adjusted, that speed, that quickness is going to come out even more. It might take him, a little more time, but once it gets there, it's going to be something that I think is going to be a major part in his game going forward in terms of having some offensive success.
So, Brad, part of that adjustment we've seen when he comes up and gets called up to the NHL. Obviously, he's had some different coaches now, and but the philosophy is similar in that they don't want you to make any mistakes. They want you to play a little more physical than you used to. You have to be defensively responsible. And so I wonder two things. I wonder, is he better off kind of like working in on the wing, even though the Flyers did have a little bit of a short bench for centers for a little while, and now it's getting better, or at least seems to be getting better. And is that when you're asking him to do all those things, is the offense inevitably going to slow down? Because that's why I think why we haven't seen like any kind of offensive output much of it on the NHL level. Because I think he's got too many other things that he feels like he has to do that aren't necessarily innate to his game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting, and I think that's a valid point. I think he's in a position where, we can see that there's a skill level there. I mean, we saw it in junior. We're seeing it at times with Lehigh Valley, and
Yep.
I think it's in some scenarios it's almost you want to put these kids because essentially, especially when you consider the NHL level. I mean, at 22 years old, he is still a kid.
Yeah.
Especially compared to a lot of guys. And you want to put the kid in a position where he's going to have some success and have some confidence. And if that means putting him in a position where he's playing the wing, where maybe there's a little less quote unquote responsibility, in some ways, it might not be a bad thing. And get him adjusted to the opportunity to develop his offensive game, because he's the nice thing is those are situations and those are things that you can work on. His offensive ability is always going to be there. His skill level is always going to be there. So I think it's a situation where maybe when you do bring him up, maybe put him in a position where you put him on the wing where the defensive responsibility is a little bit different. He's in a position where you know maybe he's got a little less to think about in terms of that, where he can go out, and then if he's worrying less about something like that, then when he's in the offensive zone and you've got an opportunity to let him go in and do his thing, then it's you let them just, you almost kind of take the reins off, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's probably, I don't think it would be a bad idea. He's like a lot of junior players, right? A lot of guys coming out of this level, especially the high end guys, it's usually the defensive game that's something that, hey, this kid's great offensively. This kid's got a ton of skill, but how good is he on, the defensive side of things? And, that's nothing against Morgan Frost. Like, he was
No.
certainly a reliable kid defensively here. I mean, he was, especially his last 2 years, and specifically that second last year where they went on a long run of the playoffs. Like, he was a kid that was taking the late faceoffs in the defensive zone. He was a kid that, you were putting on in a defensive situation. So, the ability's there. And I think it's, again, it comes down to put the kid in a position where he's going to have some success, put him in a position where he can get some confidence, and then you can start maybe working him into a position where, yes, we need you to, be a little bit different, have a different responsibility defensively. Yeah, I mean, I think there are ways to kind of get around it to, to put him in a position where, he's going to be good for you at both ends of the ice.
So when he made the jump from the Greyhounds to the pro game, I mean, I know you're never 100% ready to go pro, but do
Yeah.
you think he was at that point where he couldn't learn anything else at the junior level and that, age notwithstanding, he was ready to make that jump?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was, he was very, if he wasn't completely there, he was very close. From a skill level standpoint, I would say he was probably there in terms of making the jump and getting adjusted to the pro game. From a maturity level, I mean, he was, especially those last couple of years where he was a go-to guy on that Greyhounds team. I mean, from a maturity level, I think he was pretty well there. I don't know, even if there was a position where he, had the opportunity to play another year junior, I don't know necessarily that it would have been something that, that he needed, right? He was a kid that, especially that last year when, that Greyhound team wasn't expected to, they had just come off a championship run the year before, going to the league final. And, he was a big part of that. And that following year, that Greyhound team wasn't expected to be near as good as they were. And they ended up battling for a division title. And Morgan was a big part of that. And then, to see him go and have some success at the World Juniors that year as well. I think those things kind of put him in a position where, even if the opportunity to come back, would have presented itself, I don't know that it would have been a necessity. I think making the jump, at least to the American League at that point was probably something that's going to be good for him in the long run.
All right, Brad. My last question for you is: so in that market, with the Sioux, it's a good market. Obviously, there's some pressure, and when you're expected to score and be one of the team leaders, it's not the same as the NHL. But what kind of pressure do you feel like he was under then to kind of help him get ready to be a pro? Do you feel like there was something that was similar?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I mean, I think him and any high end player that, that comes through this market, it's, a lot of people make the joke that it's kind of like a mini NHL. And, in some ways it is, in some small way kind of like that, because, there's, at the NHL level, and especially like, you look at like, a market like Philadelphia is a perfect example where, you know, the expectation from the fans is extremely high every night, and it's
Yes, it
exactly
is.
this, and it's exactly the same way here, right? It's, even a year like this for an example, like, the Greyhound team this year is a first place hockey club. They played a lot of good hockey, and there are a lot of nights where the Greyhounds will go out and play a fairly solid game, come out with a win, and there are fans who are still, well, they didn't do this, or the coach needs to do this, or this player's doing this when he should be doing this. And I think things like that can be helpful, and they can be tough. Let's face it, they can be very tough on a young player. And even from a media standpoint, it's very different in the Sioux compared to a lot of markets. I know a lot of coaches come in and they're surprised that there are nights where there's, 3 or 4 reporters waiting to talk to them after
That's good.
games where, you go to like a market like, say, Mississauga, for example, where you might have one reporter, and
Right.
that one reporter might not even necessarily interview the visiting coach. So, there's a lot of factors here that can help, a young player, especially a high end player like Morgan, kind of get adjusted to what life's going to be like on at the NHL level on a, obviously a significantly smaller scale, but there are some things that he's going to be prepared for going forward, that when he gets to Philadelphia, when he's in that market, yes, he's not necessarily going to be used to talking to maybe a dozen reporters after a game, but he's going to have some experience, having dealt with that, or having dealt with being criticized, on social media by fans and things like that. So there's definitely an adjustment there coming into junior, but for those high end kids, it's a almost a good thing for them, because it does help them learn a little bit of what they can possibly expect at the next level.
So, our last question for you, is there one piece of advice that you would give the Flyers right now to get the most out of him?
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting question. That's a good question. I mean, he's the type of kid that, just continue to work with him, continue to, kind of do what you're doing. He's like a lot of players, and in terms of that high skill level, that, they're very smart players. So it's like, he's willing to learn. That was one thing I've always noticed in the Sioux. He was always soaking in, everything in terms of what his coaches were, trying to instill in him. So, I think it's just continue to work with them. And, again, I think maybe it comes back to a little bit of that point earlier of, put him in some points where he's in some positions, rather, that he's going to have a little bit of success in. And then once that confidence level gets there, you're going to see even more out of Morgan as well. Again, we saw it here in the Sioux that, the more his confidence level rose, the more he had some success. You saw it more and more as his career went on here in the Sioux. And, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a similar, trajectory. I won't necessarily say that he's going to be a high end scorer at the NHL
Hmm.
level, but he's going to be a kid that, I have no doubt he's got the ability to, to put up solid numbers at the pro level. We're already seeing it in the American League, and I have no doubt that he's a kid that, at some point, is, once it all kind of clicks, it's, we're going to see some, pretty decent offensive numbers from him, and it's just a matter of working with him and putting him in positions to succeed.
Well, it seems like that's what they're trying to do right now, especially coming back from the year he basically lost to injury. And, they are trying to put him in those positions to succeed. And hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he's, like I said, he's a great kid. He was a pleasure to deal with, and a lot of fun to watch. And it's nice to see him having some success at the American League level. And I'm looking forward to seeing the potential of it all clicking at the NHL level with Philly as well.
Absolutely. Well, Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. This was like a lot of fun to kind of go back in Morgan Frost's earlier career and see where we can, get the most out of him with the Flyers. Where can people find you out there?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. That was it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, I work with SooToday.com, a local media, online media outlet here in the Sioux, and generally anything that goes on the sports page is usually written by me or somehow put together on my end. And yeah, I mean, Sioux Today is primarily, although I do some work with our affiliate sites, but that's exactly where anyone can find me for sure.
All right. Thanks again, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.